Number 5. Our first story was shared to Reddit by a user named Girl Porker, and is a story that'll have you uninstalling Snapchat if you haven't already. One day, Porker received a message from a contact that he didn't recognize. The snaps were innocuous enough, a little, hey, how are you? So he assumed it was a friend messing with him on a new account that he didn't know about. The account told him he should try out a new Snapchat lens called Eyes of the Underworld, which shows you the other world hiding beneath our own. Porker installed the lens and ran it through a bit, describing the lens as a pretty simple effect, saying it just distorts whatever is on screen and adds a few flickering sprites and shadow effects to the background to give off ghostly vibe. Porker assumed it was just, marketing stunt for something, advertising something. But Porker said that a few days after, however, he'd noticed that he was sleeping a lot worse than he ever had in his life, complaining that he was having these violent, turbulent dreams where he was being pursued by shadowy figures that dragged themselves across the floor. This recurring dream happened to him 3 or 4 times. He said the dreams were stressing him, but what was really scaring him was how when he woke up, he would notice he had scratches and bruises that he couldn't explain appearing all over him. Porker said he was definitely getting scared and even considered looking into finding an exorcist just in case what he was dealing with was a true supernatural threat, which, understandable. I think if I woke up with scratches all over me, I'd assume demons were involved, or my cats. Porker smudged his house with sage and attempted to clean his house, but said that this only made things worse, and he started to hear growling late at night and experiencing intense bouts of cold sweats. And in extreme action, Porker destroyed his phone. He filled it to bursting with orange juice to fry the components and hucked it into a river to free himself. Miraculously though, it seemed to work. Porker said that after that the nightmares stopped as quick as they began, and all it cost him was a new phone. I would have tried a factory reset personally before chucking it into the water, but hey, we all have our methods. I don't think a ghost can survive a factory reset. And hey, if you're looking for more ghost stories about creepy technology and all sorts of twisted things out there, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some. If ghosts aren't your jam, we got aliens, we got cryptids, we got conspiracies, we got true crime, we got fake crime. Basically, if it freaks you out, we got a video or two on it. So hit subscribe, please make sure to hit that little bell as well, and I know this is a big ask, would you kindly do that at the end of this video, because I got 4 more scary Snapchat stories for you coming up right now. Number 4, the AI. This story was posted to Reddit as well. Recently, there was a new feature on Snapchat, which was that there was an AI that can talk to you. One day, I was in bed asking it absurd questions. Are you human? What is God to you? That's a very esoteric, absurd question to ask an AI. What is God to you? That is poetic. That's beautiful. It started to say, I'm sorry, I don't have access to this. I don't know where you are, and messages saying, it's just an AI and can't answer those questions. Can any of us answer what God is to us? Hard to ask an AI that. I had an idea to ask it to give me a location nearby. I sent that message knowing it was going to say it doesn't have access to where I live at yada yada yada. Here's a random location near you. It was a random set of coordinates. I copy and pasted the coordinates and I was shocked and confused that it was a field in Nebraska, my home state. I asked how it knew my state, but it said it didn't have access to my location. Days pass and I become bored of the AI, but the thoughts of these coordinates stuck with me for a few days until I knew I had to find the location. On a Saturday when I was off, I drove up to the location. I put the coordinates into Waze and drove where it told me to. And this location was in the middle of nowhere. I stepped out and followed my phone, and I was in a plain field with absolutely nothing. No houses, no buildings, no one. I looked into the distance and saw a small hill not too tall, and I thought that had to be it. As I walked towards it, I asked myself, was I expecting gold or cash? I felt embarrassed of all the time I was wasting here. I began to walk back until I heard faint cat noises, meowing. I turned behind and was shocked, and I walked back to a tunnel. This tunnel was covered in graffiti and it was too dark to see, so I shined my phone's flashlight. Right in front of me was a long, fleshy, skinless creature. It didn't look like it had eyes, but its mouth was a nightmare. It had rusted teeth and fingernails, and it stood there with its arm mangled. I ran back to the car. The next few days I couldn't sleep. I messaged the Snapchat team about finding illegal stuff, but I knew no one would believe me. I was so confused about how the AI gave me coordinates there. I tried to forget all about it until the next few weeks I started to see talk around town about missing construction workers all near a sewer. Blech. Number 3, old friends. Our next story is from a Reddit thread asking, what's your ghost story? And I gotta point this one out just because it was too funny, but the original poster included the title in brackets, serious, to deter any would-be paranormal pranksters. Just serious ghost stories, please. Luckily, Redditors obliged. User Barbed Cats shared this terrifying tale. When I was 37, I went to my high school reunion. I flew into the nearest airport and rented a car. The distance was about 35 miles through a very rural and almost abandoned part of the country. About 3 miles outside of town, I see someone on the side of the road flagging me down. Up in the North Woods, no one ever leaves someone else stranded, and it would turn out that the guy standing there was somebody I'd actually been to school with, my old friend Jim. Jim gets in the car and we start talking, catching up. I hadn't seen him in 20 years, but he still looked the same, maybe just a little bit older. We get to town and I ask him if he wants to come to the reunion with me and have a drink. He says no, just take me back home. Jim's parents had lived only a few blocks from my grandmother's, and I turned in that direction, but he said to take him to the part of town that really was just the outskirts, up by the fairground and the cemetery. There was a mobile home park out there, and I figured that must be where he lived. When we reached the end of the turn, he said, just drop me off here. It was nice to see you again, and he walked off into the night. So I went to the high school reunion, met up with some old classmates, and we start to talk. Now please understand me here. I am stone cold sober, nor do I ever take anything harder than soda. Tired after a 13-hour flight, but I was completely sober. As we were talking about who was showing up and who wasn't, I mentioned to my old classmate that I just picked Jim up a few miles off east of town and had dropped him up by the fairgrounds. Now for some reason everyone got really quiet. Even the guy belting out karaoke stopped, and my cousin went white as a shirt. Barb. Jim died 8 years ago. Rolled his car. I start to feel really dizzy, and I go out to the car to take some deep breaths and decide whether or not I'm going crazy. And there on the seat was a newspaper printed 8 years ago containing Jim's obituary. I still have that damn paper. Every now and again I take it out to stare at it, and I still wonder just what the hell happened that night. Number 2. Ghost on the Line. The next story comes to us from a thread asking law enforcement officers of Reddit what is the creepiest call that you've ever been on. We got a very creepy answer from user Smokey Bonaparte sharing this creepy little tale. The Redditor writes, 911 dispatcher calling in. We received a call from an elderly lady who had trouble breathing. I had taken several calls from her before and her husband in the past, so I recognized the voice. I dispatched an ambulance to her residence and held her on the line trying to keep her calm while the ambulance was responding. Ambulances advised that they had a 15-minute ETA as she was in a very rural part of West Virginia. I'm talking to her just about her husband and how she was doing, and just making pretty standard small talk with her. The ambulance arrives and I let them know that she is in severe respiratory distress, and I still had her on the line. I let her know the ambulance is coming to her door, to go answer the door, and she says okay, and hangs up the phone. Oh, that's pretty normal, right? Well, here's where it gets very weird. The EMT and paramedic on scene call back about a minute after, and they say that no one is answering the door. We have a sheriff in the area pulling on scene about that time. The sheriff unit confirmed the address, and he's breaching the door to make access to the PT. 5 minutes go by, and the paramedic on scene radios to ask me who called. I tell him it was the elderly woman who lived on residence. He tells me he's going to call this in and he needs to speak with my shift supervisor. We get him over to the supervisor, and the supervisor confirms the same information I relayed, that it was all correct, and asks what's going on. Apparently the old woman had been dead for a while and was already in full rigor mortis. They thought I was wrong on the caller, but the other dispatchers played it back for them and confirmed it was the old woman who called. The ambulance transferred the hospital and we got the same calls and disbelief from the doctors. But I took a call from a ghost that day. Number 1. Uninvited Guest. Closing off our list is this story which chilled my spine like Sub-Zero. Coming to us from user Parole Model, which hey, by the way, love the pun. It was from an Ask Reddit thread asking, what's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you? Lots and lots and lots of good ones, but this one took the cake. So lend an ear. I used to visit my friend at her house out in a rural farming area before she moved. I'd sleep over a lot and we'd just hang out and draw. I usually slept in the living room and on the couch, and there were 2 mirrors in the room that were fairly close to the TV. When the TV was off and I was walking by, I started seeing shadows move behind me. I thought it might just be something off the TV screen, and then one evening I walked into the living room to get my sketchbook so I could sketch in her bedroom. I bent over and picked it up, stood up straight, and I looked in the mirror and saw a man behind me. A man standing in the hallway leading to the living room. He was average height, bald, and a bit old. I turned to look at him and no one was there. I turned to look at the mirror again and he was gone. I felt more than a little spooked. Another time, we were just sitting in the living room, and we heard what sounded like a kid's footsteps running across upstairs quickly. She had 2 adult siblings, but they were out at work leaving us all alone. Around that time, I decided to sleep in my friend's room instead of the living room, only to wake up in the middle of the night to see 4 posters slowly get peeled off the wall. No, it wasn't just them falling and dragging each other down. It looked as if someone was carefully unsticking the tape and removing them. The next morning, my friend put them back up saying, "Well, I need to get some better tape." She and her family eventually moved out because they couldn't afford to keep living there anymore. We'd never really talked about anything that had happened in that house, as if talking about it might actually make it worse. But after she moved, I finally confronted her and said it. I said, "Dude, your house was haunted. I hope you knew that." She replied, "Yeah, we knew it was. Some guy and his granddaughter used to live there, but he took her life and then took his own. So it was probably them or something. I never told you because I didn't want to scare you." Later, she would dig out a copy of a news article she got from a local paper about the crime. The picture that went with the article was the exact man I saw all those years ago.
Starting off fifth place strong, we've got a narrowly avoided death. This tale takes place when long-term nurse Jenny was placed in charge of caring for an elderly woman with no family who was admitted to the hospital when her husband passed away. She didn't speak often, but when she did, it was usually just words that made no sense together. Jenny felt bad for her because ever since she'd arrived, so many of the residents in her area that she, seemed to enjoy spending time with had passed. She put up a picture of each of them next to the pictures of her husband and several others who were probably just family to remember them. Being an extremely empathetic person, Jenny felt sorry for this woman and strived to give her extra attention whenever she could and formed a bond with the lady. It just seemed so unfair that she had, such luck and kept losing people that she cared about. One day she looked at Jenny and said, plain as day, "Sweetie, I think I'm done now," and handed Jenny a picture. It was a picture of Jenny, and she smiled because it touched her heart that she was so important to the old woman. She passed nearly a week later, and poor Jenny cried for days from the loss. The old lady knew it was the end, and she said goodbye as best she could. Now fast forward to just under 2 years later, when Jenny was talking with a colleague, and that old lady came up in conversation. Her colleague referred to the lady as that crazy, explicit word for a female dog, which seemed very out of character for her, and it shocked and offended Jenny deeply. She expressed this to her colleague, not so nicely, and the lady looked at Jenny with a shocked look and said, "Oh dear, do you not know?" And then proceeded to explain something to Jenny that, she in fact hadn't known. As it turned out, it came out sometime after she had passed that the old lady had killed her husband by poisoning him, and that there was an investigation because it appeared that she had a ritual of befriending someone, obtaining a picture of them, and hiding the picture until she could kill them, usually by poisoning, and then displaying the picture as some sort of a trophy. It was suspected that this may have been the reason for the spike in mortality rate during her stay, and the considerable amount of photos in her collection. The last Jenny heard, the old family photos weren't any relation to the old woman, and the police were trying to ID the individuals and compare them to several cold cases. Sheesh. Thank goodness Jenny survived to tell the tale. In fourth place, time to tell the tale of a rocking bed. Nope, not a rocking horse, rocking chair, or like an ottoman. A bed. I know waterbeds are out of style and like a major safety hazard, but maybe this could inspire them to come back. New nurse Demi was working one of her first ever overnight shifts when a relative of one of her patients raced into the nurse's station, out of breath, screaming that she needed to come quick. Unable to elaborate, saying Demi had to see what she was talking about for herself. Our nurse made her way to the room in question, where this little old lady patient was crying and holding onto the bed for dear life, all while her bed was shaking extremely violently. Now, you're probably thinking that the lady was the one causing all that shaking, but apparently she was this frail, practically emaciated older lady who didn't even possess the strength to rattle the rails. The ward only had 2 other patients in it, and everyone in there was huddled in a corner, shaking in fright until it eventually subsided. Apparently that particular ward was rarely used, and the bed that the old lady was in was used even less. People who have laid in it complained of nightmares where they hear screams and laughter of angry children. I guess some restless spirit called dibs on that particular bed, and Demi would very much like it to pick somewhere else to hold court. Please and thanks.
Number 3. The Stalker. Michael Melanson is a former Marine and foster parent living in a small community in California called Kings Canyon. While checking his Snapchat messages, Melanson noticed something unsettling. Among these usual snaps was one that stood out from an unrecognized username. Intrigued, Melanson opened the snaps unsure what to expect. What he saw made this fully trained Marine chill. The message was a picture of Melanson with an unnerving caption saying, "See you soon." More pictures would get sent showing places on Melanson's daily routine. His gym, his favorite coffee shop, a close-up picture of the street sign where he lived. I would probably block that guy and actually chuck my phone into the river. I think that guy from 2 points ago had the right idea. But Melanson reached out to the authorities. It seemed like the Marine had a stalker. The police had advised him to save and document all of the messages as evidence, and they launched an investigation, although little came of it. Surprise, surprise. The snaps continued and grew more invasive. More photos of the neighborhood and frequent hotspots. It reached its peak when one of the photos was that of Michael inside his own home. Michael then fitted his house with security cameras and confided with friends about what was happening. He became hyper aware of his surroundings, constantly pinging and scanning for any threats. The stalker seemed to have calmed down and the messages were dwindling out. Was it over? If only. Eventually, the police were able to track the IP to a location nearby. The subject was a disturbed individual with a fascination with Melanson, a young man by the name of Riley Poeta, who worked at the bowling alley Melanson lived below and frequented and did most of his business in. He was taken in. The story is a modern-day horror movie plot, a reminder that not everyone in your neighborhood is as friendly as you might want them to be, and with the right information, anyone can get a hold of you. Truly spine-chilling stuff. Number 2. Thomas Sparks. Thomas Sparks was an amateur athlete who used his Snapchat mostly to highlight his athletics and daily vlogs about his life. A gymnast trying to attain as many world records as he could, and he might have broken the record for most haunted Snapchat story out there. Dubious one. Listen to the story he posted to Reddit. One day while browsing the app, Sparks uncovered a filter he hadn't seen advertised anywhere, which allegedly would show supernatural entities on camera. A joke, obviously, just meant for fun. Sounds fun. Sparks uploaded a few videos showing off the filter, thinking it nothing more than a game. But as the days went on, Sparks noticed that even when he wasn't using his phone at all, he would occasionally catch glimpses of ghostly figures in his vision, vanishing when he tried to meet them head on. Sparks attributed it to working out maybe a little bit too hard and not getting enough rest and not drinking enough water. Stay hydrated. If you learn anything from Top 5 Scary, stay hydrated. Sparks said that after about a week after installing the filter, he began hearing faint whispers when he was alone in his bedroom, and even reported that some objects seemingly were moving on their own. A lamp moved across his bedroom, things not being where he'd left it. Sparks was growing incredibly paranoid, I think as most of us would be if we invited a ghost into our home. Thomas contacted Snapchat support, but unsurprisingly, they didn't have much to offer for him, instead only giving a generic message stating that the filter is just a playful feature and the company doesn't take any responsibility for any paranormal hauntings that could occur as a side effect. Well, they probably didn't say that, but hey, have you ever read all of Snapchat's terms and conditions? That might be in there. Nobody's gonna sit down and read all that. They might have something about ghosts. Out of ideas, Sparks deleted the app from his phone and claimed that he'd stopped experiencing any of the paranormal activity that was bugging him before, and has since not used the app whatsoever. What do you think, gang? Was Sparks telling the truth? Did he unintentionally become a conduit for spiritual activity? Or is he taking home a gold medal for creative storytelling? You tell us. Also, shout out to this guy just deleting the app. Everybody else went through all this like hullabaloo, but he was the only guy who just figured out like, oh yeah, I'll just get rid of this. Seems way easier than anything else. And finally, number 1. Snapchat stories can be a very mixed bag. There's good odds most of what you'll see is just sponsored junk, ads for IGN, models doing their thing, you know. But every now and then you come across something that catches your eye and hooks you in. Maybe too far. That's what happened to James Brett Varney, an educator from Moncton, New Brunswick. Varney reportedly, while scrolling through stories, clicked on one from a profile he hadn't heard of called Unknown Realms. The story in question was a series of random, quickly edited, unsettling videos. Cryptic symbols, unintelligible writing and sounds, and quick flashes of people in dark robes surrounded by candles and ominous objects looking like a deleted scene out of Eyes Wide Shut. Varney was naturally unnerved by what he had seen, but brushed it off, assuming it was probably just, you know, promo for some sleeper indie horror A24 hit that your friends are all gonna say is really good, but you're never actually gonna watch. As time went on though, Varney found himself thinking more and more about the flashing images, saying that it felt like it was a dream replaying in his head over and over, and it was bothering him infinitely more than some stupid little Snapchat story should. He kept coming back to it to watch it over and over again to see if there was anything he missed. He said he felt like it was an invitation to some some cult. He researched Unknown Realms for a bit, but wasn't finding anything to attach it. No project, no movie, no video game. James went to report the story to the authorities to see if they'd help him, but found that when he did, the video had been scrubbed from the app. Confused, James went on to research more into the phenomena and found others online who claimed to have all seen the same mysterious story. No one was able to get to the bottom of it. Recruitment tool for a clandestine organization? Art project by some bored art majors? We might never know. A reminder that there is so much hiding on the boundless wild west of cyberspace we may never get the answers to. And you know what? That's not such a bad thing. Sometimes some stories are better left untold, some snaps better left unopened.
Number 5. Patty Donovan. This is a tale from the investigative files of Ed and Lorraine Warren, my favorite paranormal investigators. 15-year-old Patty Donovan came across the Ouija board and decided to use it to find a friend. From the first yes in response to her queries, she was hooked. She spent months falling in love with a spirit she believed to be in love with her, telling it specifics about her everyday life. After a year of telling all of her secrets to the board, Patty had become emotionally dependent on the spirit, asking it one night to reveal her future. During the very long session, it laid out a scenario of Patty's life for the next 6 years, providing specific details, right down to the date of birth of her first offspring, and the fact that she would have a total of 3 spawn by 1978, which is all information that would eventually prove correct. Being as dependent as she was on the evening of March 2nd, Patty now pleaded for the spirit to manifest. The next morning, Theodore Donovan found the spark plug wires pulled out, the rubber hoses unfastened, and the fan belt cut when he attempted to start his car. And not much later, Patty attempted to start her car, and it was discovered later that the internal engine had been completely disassembled. That week, other incidents of apparent vandalism occurred around the Donovan house. Foundation shrubs were yanked out of the ground, roots and all. On the roof, a 6-foot cast iron pipe housing electrical wires was found bent at a 90-degree angle. On Friday, March 8th, Ted marked 1 flat on the kitchen calendar. And no sooner did Patty get her car back from the shop than one of her other tires lost air. The next day, being Saturday, her father made the same entry on the calendar, although this time it seemed the tire had been cut with a sharp implement. In the meantime, Patty could no longer raise her invisible boyfriend on the Ouija board. Night after night, she tried to communicate, but the planchette would simply slide over to goodbye. She had no idea her ethereal beau had actually manifested in the form of a supernatural vandal. Like, come on, Buddy goes completely silent and your house starts being targeted by hell demons and you don't pick up on it? By the second week of March, material damage to the house and cars had become so troublesome that Ted complained to the police, who assured him that they'd keep an eye on the property during night patrols. Later that second week, after work, Ted and his wife, Ellen, were sitting in the kitchen with their son Brian when all three heard something smash against a wall somewhere inside the house. Cautiously moving to investigate, they found a gaping 18-inch hole in the plasterboard wall in Brian's room. Just as upsetting was the fact that the jagged edges of the plasterboard were pointing inwards, with the blow coming from inside the walls. Yeah, the evidence is already a mountain for me, but we still have plenty more to pick through. Listening in the dark that night, Ted heard the sound of a board being pried loose, but after checking the entire house thoroughly, found no loose boards. The house was further plagued by loud noises every night that only escalated in frequency and volume, along with further unexplainable damage to the walls. On April 1st, furniture began to levitate, with a 250-pound dresser flinging its contents while flying erratically. Rocks had also begun to rain from the sky, pelting only the Donovan house, which the police bore witness to. Ted eventually broke down at work and explained the horror of his home to his supervisor, who urged him to reach out to the Warrens. Ted instead tried moving his family into a hotel first, and the spirits followed the family there, destroying the room and making so much noise that the family was thrown out of the hotel and forced to return home. Finally contacting Ed and Lorraine, they arrived in Maine as quickly as they were able to, finding the home in complete disarray. Lorraine said nothing, although at the time she sensed in the home the presence of entities so numerous and threatening that she had to fight with herself to keep from going back outside. After a lengthy tour of the house, Ed and Lorraine conducted an interview with the entire family, where Patty's history with the Ouija board was revealed. To that I say, about dang time. The Warrens then contacted the Catholic Church to begin the process for an exorcism, which that process sadly took a month to be granted. The family experienced many more unexplainable horrors during that time, but that alone could fill out a top 5 of its own, so let me know in the comments if you want that eventually. Number 4, the first victim. The board's dark history begins with the strange death of the owner of the original trademark, American entrepreneur William Fuld, in 1927. After acquiring the business from its former owner, a medium named Helen Peters, who sold it because of the serious damage it caused to her family, William built the company into a profitable business. Shortly thereafter, he began to experience his own family troubles that resulted in him cutting his brother out of the company in 1919, and just like my mother and I, they never spoke again. 8 years later, on February 24th, William was on the roof supervising the erection of a flagpole when a support suddenly snapped and he toppled off the building. He tried to break the fall by grabbing onto a windowsill, but the window closed and he fell to the ground, breaking several ribs. He should have survived, but the vehicle hit a bump on the way to hospital that sent a splint of cracked rib bone into his heart, instantly. Now then, what a coincidence. After his death, William's descendants took over the company. Catherine and William A. Fuld ran the company until the youngest brother, Hubert, became president in 1942. The Parker brothers acquired the company and all of its assets in 1966, and finally Hasbro took over Parker Brothers, and with it, the Ouija board in 1991. I have no issue with cursing out Hasbro. While they may be great at making board games that aren't cursed, and I'm sure they're profiting on the Yikes fandom that are the adult fans of My Little Pony, they really bungled the years that they held the Disney Princess doll rights, and that's something I'll never forgive them for. In third place, we have the case of purple scrubs. Former EMT David O'Keefe worked mainly in transfers, and this particular client was always his last one of the day, having to return home late at night in the dark. She was an older woman who visited the hospital he was based out of for regular dialysis treatment. One specific day, she was being moved, and David was sitting in the back of the transport vehicle with her. She looked under the weather, so he asked what was wrong out of concern, and she said a man in purple had been visiting her. He asked if the man was, like a relative or a technician, but she shook her head. She said the man would sit next to her during dialysis appointments and stroke her hair. Thinking this was strange, right after he dropped her off at the hospital, David asked the hospital techs about, such a person, but no one had seen or remembered anyone wearing purple. Visitors also weren't really a thing at this part of the hospital, so he assumed the patient was just imagining it. While he was waiting to bring her back home, he saw the man in purple scrubs waiting outside that woman's room, watching her door. As David went to approach him, a bunch of tech personnel urgently ran past them into the woman's room, and David lost sight of the man. It turned out the woman in the room had suffered a heart attack and was sadly unable to be revived. Oh, and just a tiny creepy footnote, none of the staff in that hospital wore purple scrubs. In second place, we have a mystery mimic. Yeah, I'm fond of alliteration. How can you tell? This spooky story comes to us courtesy of former late-night transportation worker Betty. She worked the position for a few years, but after this incident, did everything possible to never work a nighttime shift ever again. The transport home base was in the basement of the hospital, where all laundry was done and all supplies were sorted and housed. On this particular night, Betty was the only one in the basement when she heard whistling at the end of the hallway by the elevator, and poked her head around the corner expecting to see her only coworker on duty that night, but there was absolutely no one there. And so, she shrugged it off. That night in particular was slower in pace, so she opted to take a snack break and veg in the break room for a bed, when she heard a loud bang out of nowhere. Betty walked into the hallway, and a bed was rolling down the hall, bumping into the sides of the walls. Now at this point, she assumed that her coworker was playing a prank on her, and she directly radioed him to chew him out, but he swore he was upstairs. Honestly, I'd be assuming the same. I've had a similar situation in a haunted house I used to work in at an old theater, but Betty was smart about it, and determined to catch her coworker in the act. She started walking down the hallway, and as she passed the laundry room, all the machines started up. She poked her head in, expecting to find him, but the room was completely empty. Just a tiny worrisome spooky flag. Nothing to worry about, right? As she walked into the laundry room, the machines came to a complete stop. Betty froze at first before regaining her senses and making her way towards the elevator, when she heard whistling from the other end of the hall. Now at this point, she's certain that she's the only worker in the basement, and is repeatedly pressing the elevator buttons in an attempt to rush it. As she was waiting for the elevator, things started falling off the shelves down the hall. Betty could only stare in shock as boxes of gloves, tissues, and packages of tubes fell off various racks one by one. Her entire body broke out in goosebumps, every hair standing on its end, and the feeling of being watched had completely consumed her thoughts. When the elevator finally arrived after what seemed like forever, Betty felt the sensation of someone brushing her arm and screamed in panic. Upon exiting the elevator upstairs, she made a beeline for the cafeteria, where her coworker actually was, and broke down explaining the entire ordeal. Now, before y'all ask, but Alexa, how was this spirit a mimic? Turns out that Betty usually whistles to herself at work at night, chats with the laundry folks during daytime shifts, and the items that fell off the shelf slowly were common items that she would have to retrieve. Yeah, big note for me on this one. In first place, we have terrified security staff. Security guard Mason claims that while he wants his location to stay anonymous, he used to work overnight security in one of the largest, best, and oldest hospitals in the USA. He and his fellow security officers all have stories about one building in particular, which was built in the late 1800s and was the original psychiatric building for this hospital. Now, being the late 1800s, not much was truly known about psychiatric disorders at that time. On top of that, this hospital was known for its medical research. Sadly, with what we all know about history, when you combine the two, that spells out a lot of nightmares. A couple years before Mason started working security there, this building in particular had been converted partially into offices after the newly built part of the hospital had dedicated a section for the updated psych ward. Mason's rounds for the first night of our tale happened to include Yep, you guessed it, that building. At night, this building was empty, due to most of the staff who worked in those offices leaving by 5 p.m. every day. Apparently some folks like to rush home, which is fair, but they would leave their office doors unlocked, which was a big no-no, due to medical information being located in their offices. Big confidential stuff. Kinda want to keep that locked up. It was security's job to go to each floor, make sure every door was locked, and if it wasn't, to secure it themselves. Mason did his initial sweep of the building to make sure it was clear of people, and then proceeded to do door checks. The hallways were pretty narrow, so he could check both sides of the hallway's doors at once. At the end of this hallway, there were 2 sets of doors you had to go through to reach the final office, which was a dead end, so you had to come back out, go the other way. He noticed everything was secure, so he was ready to move on to the next floor. He exited the 2 sets of doors from the dead-end office and froze at what he saw. Every door that he had already checked was completely ajar, and set so perfectly so that their own weight wouldn't cause them to shut again. A single wheelchair had appeared at the end of the hallway and was facing towards the steps. Mason had heard other security officers outright reject that set of rounds due to the strange stuff that was happening, but he originally laughed it off until that night. He went around and forced the now open door shut and tried to shrug it off. Nothing else weird happened that night, and he returned the next night to patrol the miners' ward. The area was just under construction, so security was needed to make sure nobody got hurt by accident and all the workers were doing their job. Safety first. When Mason was hanging out in the break room before his shift officially started, other security guards were discussing various reports of seeing a young human with brown hair who would disappear randomly, and Mason dismissed this as just gossip meant to spook off the newbies. An hour into making his rounds, a foreman who had stayed late called security and asked for a security officer to come up because, quote, a youngin' with brown hair had locked himself in a room and he didn't want him to get hurt with all the open wires in there. Mason answered the call, went and unlocked the door for the foreman, and looked in a 20x8 room for about 10 minutes, and upon seeing no one, called it in as a false alarm. He attempted to shrug it off until he received a call for backup in the psych ward, and when he arrived he noticed a patient was in a state of panic near the remnants of a shattered chandelier. Now, before he had experienced the abnormal happenings in this building, Mason claims he would have written off his testimony as idiocy, but the patient claimed that something held him in that spot as the chandelier started swinging wildly until it started to fall. When it started to fall, he was let go and allowed to move, and scrambled out of the way before it hit him. Now, this was the beginning of the end for Mason, who requested to be transferred to hospitals the next day. And as much as I love the Phantom of the Opera, I don't really want it to become reality. One of my favorite things to say in accordance with that is that I love one fictional toxic tenor, and only one. Emphasis on fictional.
Number 5, Dead Space. Dead Space is one of my favorite video games ever released, and it was one of my favorite video games ever released again when they put it out again in 2023 with some new paint on it. Dead Space is about as cosmic horror as it can get, and it's not just because it's set in space, although, that is a really big contributor because the monsters came from space. In a far future, humanity has taken to the stars mostly to strip mine planets for their natural resources by cracking them open like a walnut. Scary thing is, I can really see us doing this. On a routine mining operation, the planet cracker USG Ishimura discovers something buried inside the planet, an alien relic called the Marker, a giant evil-looking obelisk covered in alien hieroglyphs, which you would think you would know well enough. Maybe we should just leave that where it is and not bring that home, but no one on board the ship had ever seen a horror movie, I guess. Unsurprisingly, it does not go terribly well, and within about 20 minutes after bringing the Marker on board, everyone on the Ishimura is removing their eyes and writing cryptic messages with their body fluids and having vivid hallucinations of their dead loved ones, and also some horrific ancient evil sealed away as giving life to disembodied flesh and trying to swallow everyone into one big meat mass. It's bad is what I'm trying to get across. It's very bad things happening up in space. I don't even know how much we can show on this one and keep that PG rating. As the series progresses, we learn that this evil has been going on for a long time, way before us, and it's swallowed countless planets and civilizations, and humanity is really just another blip on the radar. Their ultimate goal is to converge all biological life on a target planet into this big, horrific creature called a Brethren Moon, this big, planet-sized legion of flesh that eats other planets. Dead Space makes you feel absolutely helpless, alone, and just completely insignificant. By the end of the first one, you've seen literally every single character die, and you are the only survivor of the first one. You're just one engineer hopelessly trying to survive against against a primordial species of pure evil. And as the series was coming to a horrific, exciting conclusion, the series did get cancelled on a cliffhanger by EA, which is the most cosmic horror thing I can think of. And as always, if you're looking for more horror content, be it scary stories, true stories, fake stories, alien sightings, cryptids, monsters, conspiracies, really big sharks, Top 5 Scary has a little bit of everything and then some on top of that. So slap that bell for me, subscribe, and don't miss a single scary. But keep watching this video, okay? If you don't mind, I worked hard on it. Alright, moving on. Number 4, Event Horizon. Event Horizon is one of my favorite underrated horror movies and is also one of the major inspirations for Dead Space, which is probably why I like it so much. I think just something scary happening on a spaceship is the coolest setting imaginable for a work of horror fiction. Scary things don't happen in space, and if you'd screamed, who would even hear it? Event Horizon is the name of the movie and also the titular spaceship, which went missing in deep space years prior to the film's start and has just reappeared. That's normal, spaceships do that all the time. A recovery crew is sent out to the Event Horizon to try and figure out just what happened and learn pretty quickly that things went to hell, like in the most literal sense of that term. It turns out that the Event Horizon was testing out a new kind of warp technology that allows for faster than light travel, and somebody crossed a wrong wire, didn't check their calibrations, and they accidentally got sent through hell. Hate when that happens. You really gotta be careful with the warp, just ask the Imperium. That's one for my Warhammer fans out there, all two of you. Event Horizon is that kind of cosmic horror where the enemy is just something invisible and undefeatable and infinitely larger than ourselves. It's not so much that there's like a demon or a devil that's bothering people, just this incomprehensible power beyond our paltry human understanding that drives you to jabbering madness, the kind that makes you tear your eyes out and bump uglies like a Hieronymus Bosch painting. If you've never seen Event Horizon, genuinely cannot recommend it enough. I always felt like it should have been a way bigger deal than it was. I feel like there's room for some sequels or something. It's got some fantastic performances from Lawrence Fishburne and Sam Neill, and maybe has one of the genuinely scariest scenes in a horror movie ever. If you've seen the movie, the security footage of what happened to the original crew of the Event Horizon is forever burned in the parts of my brain that I talk to my therapist about.
Number 3, a long-term buddy. I'm using buddy pretty loosely here. This tale comes from Reddit user Madame Mim20, which I'm hoping is a reference to The Sword in the Stone. During her junior year of high school, she went to a party where the host brought out a Ouija board, and she admitted that she was into paranormal stuff, but didn't know the dangers of, one of those boards. Typical questions were asked, but her vision began to darken, even though the lights were on. The last question being the classic, how old will I be when I die? Everyone got traditional numbers except for Mim. The planchette moved to 0, and then 1, then 0, then 1, continuously moving between those two numbers until someone just shook the board and said it was being stupid. At that point she stopped playing since it weirded her out, and I'm sensing 2 red flags so far. But I'll excuse one of them since she didn't know the horrors at the time. Mim claims to have a decent ability to sense the unknown and normally see, beings or ghosts. This one showed up during one of her classes not even a few weeks later. If anyone's getting deja vu, this is reminding me of Patty Donovan as well, don't worry. At first the ghost appeared like a comforting protector, until he wasn't. Weird things in Mim's home would happen, ranging from drawers opening, whispers, shadows, lights in places where they shouldn't be, and books moving on their own. And at night it would be much, much worse. He would just stand in front of her door and the fear would ooze out of him as his form would change. Mim had no doubt that he was downright evil, to which I say, no S-H-I-T Sherlock. She dealt with all of this single-handedly until she moved in with her husband, so I'll give credit where credit is due for enduring that. Things escalated in the now duo's first home together, a small 400 square foot rental. Footsteps, breathing, and unknown whispers became the norm. At the time, her soon-to-be husband was a practicing Wiccan and had blessed most of the home, but forgot about the porch and outer walls, where they would hear scratches on the walls and knocking on the door and windows. Folks had seen her demonic attachment as a shadow and described him as tall and built like a brick house. Also that he felt just outright bad and would always go back into the room Mim was in. Her husband had tried to banish him out and it didn't go well. For context, her husband worked the closing shift at his place of employment and would get home at around 3:30 a.m., which happens to be right in the middle of prime haunting hours. There was a road he would have to take that was very haunted as well, with a history of lots of accidents and right next to a good-sized river. One night he got home looking extremely pale and sweating. Turned out that while driving on that specific road that night, his brakes failed and he couldn't stop. He was going about 100 kilometers an hour, and the wheel began to jerk out of his hands towards the river. He had to use all his strength to keep that car on the road because the wheel was just yanking so hard. To the shock and surprise of no one, the brakes were fine the next day, and ditto for the wheel. This was the final straw, and the duo had a priest bless the entire house and were eventually able to move out of the state and leave whatever it was behind. Number 2, teenage hijinks. This tale comes from a gal named Jenny and also dates back to, well, high school hijinks. She was at her friend's house for a fun summer weekend, and on the Sunday night, they decided to make themselves a Ouija board, taking all the precautions, using a piece of flat plywood, which was laminated with plastic on one side, and using an old glass which could later be discarded. This was the first experience for both of the teens, and they assured each other that they were going to do it properly. No being stupid and pushing the glass around to fool the other. They started off by saying a prayer before asking if there were any spirits present, trying to be specific about only wanting contact with peaceful and good energies and spirits. Here's the thing, you can't guarantee who is going to answer a Ouija board, and evil spirits are gonna lie if they need to deceive you. So while I commend the intent, I'm already sensing a yikes situation. The glass was moving very slowly at first, and they were unsure if it was working or not. The duo asked if there was somebody who wished to talk to them, and the glass moved slowly over to the yes marker. They asked the spirit, if it was male or female, and it indicated that it was female. When asked to spell out its name, the glass first traveled to K, and then to a Y, and then to M, before ending on the center, ergo spelling out Kim. Jenny's friend went white, and it was obvious that he was freaked out. They then asked how she died, and the spirit spelled out car, which further scared Jenny's friend. Next, they asked what kind of car it was that Kim had died in, and it proceeded to spell out Reliant Robin. It was at this point that her friend told Jenny that his auntie was dead, her name was Kim, that she died in a car accident, and she was driving a Reliant Robin. Next, they asked if the spirit had anything to tell them, but it indicated no and then said goodbye. As much as I hate to crush spirits, pun not intended, I doubt that was actually his aunt. Probably just a demonic spirit playing an awful joke, which is something I wouldn't wish on anybody. So next they asked if there was any more spirits that wished to communicate with them. It suddenly got very cold in the room, and the hair was standing up on both teens' necks and legs. This spirit was more powerful, and the glass moved a lot faster. They asked if it was male or female, and it indicated that it was a male. Once again, following a formula, they asked for the spirit's name, and he said he was called Liam. Next, the duo asked for the spirit's age when he passed over, and he went to the 7 and then to the 0, indicating 70. Finally, they once again asked whether he had anything to tell them, and it proceeded to spell out Ollie, which happened to be Jenny's friend's younger brother's name. Her friend then explained that his younger brother Ollie had seen the spirit of an old man standing in the garden some years earlier. They ended their session with another prayer, and while I commend their attempts at making things safe, I hope the spirits that know way too much about them are leaving them alone. Number 1, predicting a death. Heads up, this might be a little triggering for folks, so I promise I won't mind if you hop off now. Heck, the first time I read this story, I got tears in my eyes because it hit close to home for me. Allison was a teen at the time and was at a friend's house for a sleepover when she and her friends decided to play with a Ouija board in the garage. Her friend's mother was at work and her father was in bed, so they had no supervision and decided some debauchery was in order. While playing with the board, they asked if anyone wanted to speak to them and got a yes, so they asked for a name. They got Mom. And when they asked for a message, it said under bridge. No one understood the message at the time. Later, after they had gone to bed, there was a knock at the front door. It was the local sheriff who had come to the house to tell the girl's father that his wife had been in a car accident on her way home from work that night, and her car was found submerged in water under a bridge just a few miles from their home. While I don't believe it was actually the mom communicating over the board, I'm just hoping it wasn't a demon who actually caused harm. But yeah. I don't really have much more to say on this tale, other than I feel like I've had the wind knocked out of me.
In at number 5, we have Songs of a Dead Dreamer. Songs of a Dead Dreamer by Thomas Ligotti was written in 1986 and is a cosmic horror short story collection, housing 3 different sections for different types of dreams. Dreams for sleepwalkers, dreams for insomniacs, and dreams for the dead. These short stories navigate through a lurid dreamscape in a bizarre and cosmic horror manner. Additionally, throughout the series, you will find a recurring theme of puppets, dreams, clowns, and inescapable fate, leaving you with a disturbing sense of uneasiness and disillusion. As the book progresses, the cosmic creepiness escalates, and like most cosmic horror stories, this book blends reality, creating a gateway to a new dimension. This new dimension invites you into the unsettling darkness that is the book. Ligotti's raw and experimental work is a response to how little our world actually matters. Furthermore, it's a play on the fact that we as humans cannot help but be drawn to the dark and dangerous, being always one precipitous step away from our horrific and total demise. You can see this directly in the book, as on every new page the character receives life or a fate worse than death. Influenced by the strange terrors of Lovecraft, Ligotti shapes his path in the cosmic horror realm with his unique yet bizarre way of storytelling. Safe to say you might not want to read this book before bed. In at number 4, we have the Omo Sequence by Laird Barron. Written in 2007, the Omo Sequence is an ironic riff on the classic H.P. Lovecraft story. With 9 short stories, this book is a bizarre insanity-blasting cosmic horror novel. Evil things happen to the character in Baron's stories, and these bad things often threaten the entire race and even the planet while at it. By being driven to face the cosmic horrors for work, these characters are driven to their own demise. The characters within this novel are on a journey to collide with the greater unknown and remain unaware until it's too late, tackling the broad concept of unavoidable fate. The world that Baron creates in these stories is filled with unknown predators and the corruption of his characters. In this realm, humans are merely nothing but food to the monsters that inhabit the land, touching on themes such as race, capitalism, fear, and masculinity. Read with caution to the sheer terrifyingly heavy unhinged novel that is the Omo Sequence. Baron's work is a sensory overload of complex stories and cosmic horror, and is definitely not for the faint-hearted.
Number 3, Annihilation. Now, I've talked about Annihilation on the channel more than a few times because I am a massive fan of the movie, and I'm putting it here because while it's definitely more famous as a movie, and that's what I know it as best, it was also a book, and I was worried if I didn't have at least one book on here you would think I'm illiterate. I am, but that's a different issue. I honestly don't read enough, so if you have a great cosmic horror book that isn't by old hodgepodge Lovecraft, shout it out down below so I can stop shaking whenever I get asked to talk about a medium that isn't video games or movies. Anyway, back to the original topic. Annihilation is a fantastic cosmic horror story that makes you feel pitifully small, completely confused, and maybe a tiny bit better about yourself. A biologist, Lena, gets a bit of a surprise when her thought-to-be-dead husband returns home but comes back different. Wrong, as if he's not really the same guy anymore. It's not long until she finds herself following in her husband's footsteps, swept up in a giant government conspiracy, investigating what he was looking into, a quarantined area of the swamps of Florida that have been affected by some alien presence called the Shimmer that is warping everything and merging all biological life together into this horrific cosmic gumbo, making everyone into these scary amalgamations of different creatures and plants. And I know for a fact I have shrieked in a previous video at length about how much I love the Annihilation bear, which is an absolute showstopper of horrifying creature design. Throw up a picture of the Annihilation bear, would you kindly? Oh, love that thing. Annihilation is the kind of story that really worms its way into your brain, has you questioning just about everything, and then asking if you can't tell the difference, does any of it really matter? It's a nice one to get you thinking about all these big questions like, why are humans the way they are? Why are people in love hurt each other? Why do humans have such self-destructive tendencies? And what would happen if a bear got merged with a crocodile and a human, and how yucky would that look? You know, all the really big philosophical questions. If you still haven't seen the movie, I'm not going to stop mentioning it in these videos until you do. Even you. Number 2, The Void. The Void is everything I am looking for in a movie, and I know that my tastes aren't always the same as you guys. The Void is wet, it's sticky, it's gross, and it's a low-budget horror movie about a troubled cop with personal issues. That ticks all my boxes. When a small-town deputy notices a wounded man crawling in the road, he takes him out to a local hospital run by a weary overnight staff with limited resources, including his ex-wife he's got a bit of a tense relationship with. Definitely already a long night. Things are seeming weird, what with the legions of cryptic cloaked cultists surrounding the hospital, preventing them from leaving. He starts to have a hunch that maybe something's up, especially when everyone around him starts to mutate into these horrific flesh beasts that would make David Cronenberg blush. It becomes very clear, very fast, that whoever these cultists are, they've found a gateway to another world, and are quite intent on inviting their horrific slimy friends from the other side over. The Void really captures that feeling of just being totally out of your element. No one has any idea what's going on the entire time, neither do you. They're just scared and in way over their head. You know, you're not dealing with like some special forces, highly trained soldiers, or a secret government agency that's been tracking this cult and these gods for years or anything. Just a very tired deputy and an overworked hospital staff trying to deal with madness overtaking everyone, and most of their patients mutating into disgusting tentacle beasts. If you're a fan of monster movies with practical effects, The Void does not disappoint at all. Takes a lot of cues from John Carpenter's legendary horror movie The Thing, with the monsters looking a lot like The Thing? The whole movie kind of actually has this like faux 80s movie vibe. Like it's the kind of thing you'd pull out of a blockbuster that was forgotten about. Definitely seems like John Carpenter would have worked on it. The Void gets a massive recommend from me for horror movie fans, for cosmic horror fans, and for people who just really want to support low budget independent Canadian cinema. I know that's most of you out there. And finally coming in at number 1, Uzumaki. We don't talk about horror manga on this channel nearly enough. It's an entire medium out there of fantastic storytelling and art that will drive you bonkers. If you're a fan of horror manga at all, like even a little bit, then you know there's pretty much no one who does it better than Junji Ito, who's kind of like the Stephen King of horror manga, cranking out banger after banger, all as memorable and macabre as you could possibly hope. Ito's works vary in content, but most of them are usually about something absolutely disgustingly horrible happening to your body, and Uzumaki is no exception and probably one of the most famous examples of his work. A lot of fans consider Uzumaki to be his magnum opus. Not me, I'm a Tomy guy all the way. Uzumaki tells the story of a Japanese town that has fallen to some incredibly bizarre curse affecting everything, spiraling inwards. Everything. It starts small, you know, people's hair starts to curl and then starts to move onto people's flesh. You might have seen like, there's a very famous image from this manga of like a girl whose face is all spiraled inwards, and then the town's geography, everything starts to spiral. Our protagonists leave this cursed town, return later, discover that it's been years since they left, since the spiral curse is affecting the flow of time as well. Really nothing is going right whatsoever. Eventually they discover that this curse has been going on for a long time and is the product of an ancient evil, infinitely bigger than themselves and seemingly unstoppable. If you've never read any of Junji Ito's works at all, I cannot recommend him enough, even if you're not a big fan of manga traditionally. His stuff isn't really like most manga out there. There's no superheroes or epic powers or, you know, big spiky haircuts and cat girls. Mostly just like horrific body horror and very creative little stories. A lot of his works have been adapted. Netflix recently just worked on an animated series based on some of his stories. I haven't had time to check it out yet, but passing that on to you if you're interested. Number 5. Walking Dead. My first true tale of phantasmic terror comes to us from Reddit user Jalcott. Answering a question posed in the thread, nurses and doctors of Reddit, what's the weirdest and most paranormal thing you've ever experienced? Hospitals already seem pretty haunted as is, so it's no surprise that there was so many good answers. But Jalcott stood out. Take a listen. I'm a psychiatric nurse, and early on in my career, I worked at a residential mental health facility. One of our residents was an elective mute, which means that he didn't talk, but there was no medical reasoning as to why. He had spoken earlier in his life, and in fact seemed quite normal back then, with the exception of being close to 7 feet tall. He'd been raised in the deep south and joined the army when he was 19, but one night he vanished. He was declared AWOL, and eventually he was declared missing, and later officially declared dead. However, 10 years later, a 7-foot-tall man walked into a Virginia hospital ER in my part of the Midwest and said to the receptionist, "My name is Marion Deschênes, and I've been dead for 10 years. And according to the Redditor, those were the last words he ever spoke to anyone. He had shown up to the hospital covered in dust and wearing an old uniform that he'd been wearing the night he vanished. His social security had not been used at all, and he had no ID on him whatsoever. However, via fingerprints, they were able to identify him. The family was notified, but they said they had already grieved their lost man and that whoever was claiming to be him simply wasn't, and asked to never be contacted again. The nurse went on to add that Marion would pace all day, every day, moving his mouth in a way that looked like he was muttering to himself, but nothing came out when he moved his lips. He had an unnerving habit of throwing his head back with his mouth wide open as if he was laughing hysterically, but not so much as a breath could ever be heard. The nurse said she tried talking to him almost daily, and he would appear to listen, but only react by periodically throwing his head back in that laughter-mimicking way of his. Various medications and treatment plans were pursued, but nothing ever affected him. Therapy was tried as well, but all that would happen was Marion would just grin and start pacing again. She goes on to say that on her last day, she saw Marion pacing in the parking lot, throwing back his head to laugh. She closes by saying all those years she'd wondered, was he a ghost? And all those years later, she still doesn't know. Click through and listen to as many top 5 scary videos as your ears can handle. Moving on. Number 4, things that go bunk in the night. Now you would never ever believe this, but our next story comes from Reddit as well. A similar thread, a similar question. What's the most paranormal thing you've ever experienced? Lots of good ones to pick from, but this one from Mad Rampager really stood out for me. I used to be in the military. The training camp bunk that we lived in was said to be haunted. Occasionally, our stuff would go missing and reappear in weird places, like under our bed or inside a bag that we'd zipped up and stuff. No big deal, right? Weird things happen, and I mean human error and all that. Well, then came the instance that freaked everybody out. It was night after lights out, and my friend was on his phone texting his girlfriend. Most of us had been drifting off to sleep and we were lying on our beds when suddenly my friend heard the shuffling of feet from the corridor. So, thinking that it was our sergeant, he quickly hid his phone under his pillow, rolled over on his side, and tried to get to sleep. What happened next still chills me to the bone to this day. While he pretended to sleep, he heard someone right behind him at the other end of the bed saying, "Don't worry, you can continue to pretend to sleep." I could have dismissed this as a figment of his imagination, except me and 5 other people around him heard it. Creepier still, there was no one there. And weirdly, it sounded like the voice of a young girl that had said it. For reference, our camp was in the middle of an island and was set up away from the main admin building. The island had been closed by the government for army training purposes for the past 15 years, so there were definitely no civilians around, let alone any children. To make matters freakier, when we came back from our weekend home leave, there was a bunch of hair on his bed, neatly bundled up, long and jet black, and underneath his pillow was a note. Remember me? Now, as I said, we're in the middle of a forest, in the middle of an island, and at that point in time, there were no female recruits whatsoever on the island. Our bunks were locked for the weekend, and the duty sergeant had no idea what had happened. We never spoke about it again after that night, and it still chills me every time I think about it.
In at number 3, The Fisherman by John Langan. This novel is a blended mix of dark folklore, human frailties, and of course, cosmic horror. Taking place in upstate New York, it follows the story of 2 widowers who have found comfort in their shared enjoyment of fishing. After many weekends of fishing trips, they take a trip to Dutchman's Creek. The creek is known for being dangerous to fishermen, though nobody is sure why, as it has a reputation for taking the lives of fishermen who visit. What they find and hear on their way to the creek might just be the remedy for both their losses, as they meet someone who tells the horrifying tale of how the Dutchman Creek got its name. Though they find themselves in a deep and dark tale of long buried secrets and a mysterious human-like man known as the Fisherman. This new dark and unknown realm they are pulled through will bring the 2 men face to face with what they have lost, and the price they will have to pay to regain it. The Fisherman has been compared to pure Lovecraftian horror at its finest, with some Americana mixed into it, filled with personal, quiet horror and dark despair. With the overarching theme of grief and the loss of a loved one, Langan tells the story in a way that creates an atmosphere of terror and uneasiness through a surrealist vision. This is a story about bereavement, deceased wives, and some of the horrors of life told within a cosmic horror reality. Coming in at number 2, we have Agents of Dreamland by Caitlin R. Kiernan. Taking inspiration from Lovecraftian horror, Kiernan blends cosmic horror with a government investigation setting in her novel Agents of Dreamland. Taking place in Southwest America in the summer of 2015, this novel merged the atmosphere of cosmic horror with the tropes of a science fiction tale, making for a claustrophobic and unnerving experience, creating a refreshingly dark and twisted story. The similarities do not end there, as Kiernan also manages to convey the overwhelming atmosphere of hopelessness that Lovecraft novels are best known for. Hopping around in time, telling the story of an apocalyptic cult and an investigator trying to stop the cult. The government special agent is on the hunt to investigate an event that happened earlier in the week, though this event has no explanation but which haunts the agent, while in contrast the cult leader is gathering the weak to offer a chance for transcendence. The signalman is on the hunt for his cult leader Drew Standish after he witnesses the grisly aftermath of the transcendence he promises. As the agent tries to forget the terrifying scenes he has seen, a woman travels through time and space to understand what is happening, right before losing contact with the New Horizons probe as it makes contact with something outside of Pluto's orbit. Kiernan's passion for Lovecraft's work shines through the novel with the attention to detail and horrific dark tone of the novel. Kiernan's depiction of humanity's inevitable fall to the Elder Gods is truly Lovecraftian. Within this aspect of the novel, there's a lesson to be told about humanity's doom and the limited time for our planet. However, the author shows us that our own actions in the face of the inevitable fate of humanity are what gives us our humanity. And in the end, the unavoidable end to our world does not negate the importance of compassion you can give while waiting for the impending doom. And finally, in at number 1, we have A Lush and Seething Hell, 2 tales of cosmic horror. Bringing together his best-selling cosmic horror short stories, John Horner Jacobs creates a terrifying novel that examines the violence and depravity of the human condition, while adding the surrealistic realistic aspect of cosmic horror. This novel is a mix between the supernatural and psychological of the scary imagination of Lovecraft. The story, My Heart Struck Sorrow, follows the story of a music archivist at the Library of Congress as he is tasked with gathering recordings of a recently passed ethnomusicologist, where he would be led down a road of the desperate revelation of grief and guilt. The second short story in this novel, The Sea Dreams, It Is the Sky, it is a much shorter but still delivers in eeriness. This story revolves around the fictional South American country of Madeira, with two main characters whose lives become intertwined. When one of the characters finds the other's journal that is dripping with horrible secrets, what follows is a disturbing scene and skin-wrenching terror. This novel is most known for being breathtakingly haunting, which takes you on a terrifying journey into the darkness, compelling us to confront secrets best left hidden. Both stories are filled with unsettling moments. This novel is where the parallels lie between the personal trauma and dread, and what lies beyond the edge of reality. Jacob decodes what it means to truly understand how humanity can crumble within seconds, and the guilt of being liable for its deconstruction. This chilling duo of emotional stories will have you awake at night guessing what's real and what's fiction.